Hello, you're watching Talking Europe on France 24. Now, we record today's programme as major uncertainty continues to hang over the Brexit process. Uncertainty for lawmakers, the public, and British people living here in the European Union. An estimated 200,000 UK citizens live here in France. And to talk about how Brexit is affecting them, their lives and businesses, as well as the future for Brits and their French neighbours, someone who's very much on the front line of all this, British Ambassador to France, Edward Llewellyn. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Let's talk about the most chaotic scenario for both the UK and the EU side, the potential no deal. In your opinion, how likely is it at this point that that will come about?
Well, it can't be excluded. The legal position, as we speak, is that Britain is due to leave the European Union at the end of next week on the 12th of April, unless an agreement is passed or unless there is a further extension. But as I say, that situation really, everything needs to be done to try to avoid that.
Well, Europe and the rest of the world looking on with bafflement, sometimes derision we're really starting to see now as I travel around Europe. I know you speak to many, many people as an ambassador. Do you feel that the UK has been diminished by this process?
Well, I think what you're seeing, obviously, it's a difficult process. It's a difficult and complicated situation. And as you referred earlier to the several 100,000 British citizens living here in France, there are 1 million British citizens living elsewhere in the EU. For them, it's a worrying and uncertain time. But at the heart of the matter is, a government that is trying to find a way to implement an agreement that respects the result of the referendum of June 2016, but also maintains strong links with our European partners, economic, political, people-to-people ties that are at the heart of so many of these relationships, including particularly the relationship between France and Britain.
At the same time, though, when you've got the French Europe minister, as was until a couple of days ago, Nathalie Loiseau, saying, I called my cat Brexit because he meows to go out and then doesn't want to leave when I open the door. I mean, that seems like quite a diminishment of the sort of diplomatic respect from one country to another.
Parliamentary procedure can occasionally seem a bit complicated and mysterious, viewed from outside the UK. But at the end of the day, that's what you're seeing happening. It's members of Parliament trying to do the best for their country, trying to work out the best way forward.
Let's talk about the Brits living in France, estimated 200,000 or so. As I said, I know you've spoken to many of them. What have been the biggest concerns that you've heard from people?
Well, obviously, the overriding concern is this sense of uncertainty. They want to know what the future holds. The questions range from, will I be able to stay? Will I be able to continue to live here? Will I be able to continue to work here?
And people worried about pensions,
very
and
practical questions about healthcare, about pension rights, about recognition of qualifications, and so on. And I think the key point at the heart of all of this, although I recognise it's a very uncertain period, is that both governments want their citizens to stay. The British government has been very clear that we want European citizens living in the UK to stay, including the several 100,000 French citizens. And the French government, both in a deal and also in a no-deal scenario, have been very clear that they want Brits to stay here in France.
The people themselves, though, I'm sorry to cut in, they tell us, the British in Europe group, they say we've spent 3 years in limbo. We keep hearing people say we've been used as bargaining chips. To an extent, that is true, isn't it? Citizens' rights could have been ring-fenced by one side or the other.
Well, citizens' rights are extremely important. They're at the heart of this matter. We've engaged in a very substantial outreach programme across the country. I've done with my colleagues now over 50 meetings all over France. And we're going to keep up that effort over the coming months and indeed over the coming years.
Have you and your teams at the embassy perhaps been left a little bit on your own with this? Because that British in Europe group, which is one of the major groups I mentioned, they've never been received by any of the Brexit ministers, by the Prime Minister herself. They have met Michel Barnier, other European representatives. Have you been left a bit on your own with this? Well,
we talk to those, to representatives of British citizens all the time, including those organisations. We do regular meetings with them. But as I say, we also, with their help, organise substantial meetings for Brits all over France. They're typically attended by 200, sometimes 300 people.
Probably would have helped you, though, perhaps, if one of the Brexit ministers could have come over at some point. You're not the Brexit minister yourself.
That's correct. I'm the ambassador here in France. I've done a meeting with one of the ministers, with Robin Walker, for example. We've held a meeting with representatives of organisations representing British citizens here in France. So we have done that. But as I say, it's a vital part of my embassy's work to stay in touch with and to reach out to British citizens all across this country in a way that hasn't been so necessary in recent years while we were a member of the EU.
Just to come back to that potential no-deal scenario on April the 12th, there are predictions of very practical chaos, not just for Brits in France, but for really everybody, the ports of Calais, for example, the Eurostar, the Channel Tunnel. Are you worried about what's going to happen?
The British government has been preparing, reaching out to over 145,000 businesses. There are 10,000 British civil servants working on Brexit. I think £4 billion has been spent on no-deal planning. So that planning is happening, and I know it's happening on this side of the Channel. Our French colleagues are doing the same, but it would be far, far preferable to have an agreement and for Britain to leave with an agreement in place in a calm and orderly way.
Just moving away from citizens to talk about businesses, of course, very key. There's a project that was launched 2 years ago, planned, we're told, before Brexit, aiming at strengthening Franco-British ties. It's called Les Voisins, or the Neighbours. It's coming up to its second anniversary. Now, how easy would you say is it today to convince French businesses and groups that they do want to keep up ties with the UK in this rather chaotic climate we've talked about?
I think there's a very strong desire to do that. And I think that's why this campaign, this programme called Les Voisins, the Neighbours, I think is so important. We launched it shortly after I became the ambassador in March 2 years ago. It was launched by the Duke of Cambridge, by Prince William, from the embassy in Paris. And I think that speaks to the deep relationship between our countries, 1,000 years of shared history, the last 200 years of which, on the key issues of the day, Britain and France have been strong allies.
Well, just to come back to the business aspect, we have heard expressions of worry, fear, concern from, for example, the Institute of Directors. I think they said it was December, they were tearing their hair out. British businesses are tearing their hair out over the lack of clarity. Do you feel that the process has damaged businesses, business ties, or perhaps the question should be, how damaging has it been?
Well, I think, as I say, the overall uncertainty is something that businesses on both sides of the Channel want to bring to an end. They want to know that we're going to be able to move forward, we hope on the basis of an agreement that provides a clear way forward, a clear framework for the future relationship. Business hates uncertainty.
And they're having to make contingency plans and stockpile and put people on holiday or
businesses are making contingency plans. I mean, I would just say that despite the uncertainty, which I acknowledge, the economy remains strong. Our economic ties remain strong. The key question now is how we make sure they stay strong in the years ahead.
I'd just like to take us back a couple of years. Before your current posting, you were Chief of Staff to the former Prime Minister David Cameron at the time of the EU referendum. I'd just like to get some insights into that. What was your advice to him at the time?
Well, you wouldn't expect me to comment on advice that I gave to the Prime Minister in my last job. I'm now in this job here as the Brit.
Did you imagine we would be in this situation today?
As the ambassador to France. I think this relationship between Britain and France is extremely important. It's important it stays strong. It's not just my view, it's the British government's view as well. The referendum in the summer of in June 2016 was a referendum that produced a result which the government is in the process of trying to implement.
Was there contingency planning for this outcome? Of course, nobody on the government side was hoping for this outcome, but was there contingency planning?
Well, the government has engaged in considerable planning since the result of the referendum, as you can see. I referred earlier to the 10,000 civil servants that are working on this. But I repeat, the key aim is to secure this agreement, for the House of Commons to agree a way forward that allows Britain to leave the EU with an agreement in place in a calm and orderly way. And that is the priority right now.
And just obviously the one person we haven't really heard much from in this process is David Cameron, who was Prime Minister at the time. Has he expressed any regret to you as his former closest advisor?
I think questions for David Cameron, you should put to David Cameron.
OK, we will certainly endeavour to do so. I'd like to move on with one diplomatic issue that has already come up over the last few months. Once the UK has left the EU, a major part of the negotiations with the French will be over fishing rights. Currently, European vessels do have the right to fish in British waters. The British government actually allows a large proportion of its fishing quota to be bought up by foreign fleets, more than 20%, for example, to Dutch fishermen. After Brexit, though, it isn't clear what the situation will be. So let's watch this report together from Claire Paquelin.
It's 4 a.m. in the English Channel. We're on board the Marmozet, a French fishing trawler steered by Olivier. He's been a skipper for 30 years and often casts his net in British waters. Britain's seas are among the most fish-rich in the world, a treasure shared among European fishermen for centuries. Olivier mostly fishes in the Channel, the sea that separates northern France and southern England.
We can see the Douglas Spit. I spend 60 to 70% of my time in British waters. France is here, and the United Kingdom is on this side. This is the narrowest section where the two coastlines are closest. They're only 22 kilometres apart. I'm about in the middle. You can see here, that's my boat, and the borderline is in green. So here, this is the English side, and that's the French side. So obviously, if, after Brexit, us French are kicked out of British waters, I'll lose 70% of my profit. Basically, I'll go bankrupt.
Since 1983, boats from across the EU have been fishing freely in one another's economic exclusive zones. When Britain leaves the EU, this zone, which stretches 200 nautical miles from the coastline, will no longer be European. If Britain restricts access, European vessels could lose more than half of their catch. French fishermen would lose the most money, 170 million euros a year. After 72 hours of fishing, the Marmozet arrives home in Boulogne. This is the busiest fishing port in France. 65% of the catch comes from British waters. With Brexit looming, it's on borrowed time.
There we go. Coming back to you, Edward Llewellyn, British Ambassador. We saw those skirmishes, the so-called Scallop Wars in 2018 between French and British fishermen. Do you think that more of this could be likely?
I very much hope not. I mean, I think what's important here, again, is it underlines the importance of Britain leaving the EU with an agreement in place. I think your package there demonstrates how much that's not only in Britain's interest, but it's also in the interests of France and of our other European partners as well. We all have a huge stake in this, in managing this situation together and in coming forward with an agreed way forward that would be in the interests of, obviously, of the British fishing industry, but also of others as well.
Just looking at that more diplomatic aspect between the two nations, President Macron here in France has emerged as a bit of a hardliner, I think we can say, in the Brexit negotiations. He said things before the last summit like, European leaders understand and respect the will of the British people, but we defend the interests of our own people. Have you been surprised by this quite hardline stance from France?
I'm not surprised to see, the French government and the French president standing up for French interests as they see it. The British government does the same. British prime ministers do the same. That's the job of national leaders. Our ties are so deep, not only at the people-to-people level, but the way in which our countries work together around the world. We're the two foremost military powers of Europe. We're both members of the UN Security Council. We're the two nuclear armed powers of Europe. As we sit here today, British helicopters, Royal Air Force helicopters, are operating alongside French forces in Mali, carrying those French troops forward. All of that underlines how Britain and France see the world in a similar way. We have shared values when it comes to approaching the world, and that's not going to change with Britain's departure from the European Union.
President Macron has said that France is the country that he thinks is best prepared for a disorderly exit from the EU. Do you think that France would allow a no deal to happen? Well,
I very much hope, as I say, that it'll be possible for Britain to leave on an agreed basis. The European Council said when it agreed that extension the week before last that a further extension would require a clear plan from the UK.
So it's not an empty threat?
That's what European leaders have said. That's what the European Council has said.
All right, Edward Llewellyn, British Ambassador here in France. Thank you very much. Trying to keep the entente cordiale at the British Embassy. Thank you for watching Talking Europe as well. We'll see you very soon for more European news, of course, here on France 24.